introduction, and it's good to see everybody, or most of you. Um, you know, Speaking in DMBA, I feel honored. It's the cradle of TMBA presidencies. As I was driving in, thinking about how many of the TMBA presidents come from the Dallas kind of area. I mean, just in recent time, you had Mary Perello, Tim Fisher, Trey Worley, Mr. Raskin, who's with us today, and then behind me we'll have Steve Remington. So Dallas is clearly the cradle of mortgage banking for our state, and I think it shows up in our track record. So glad to speak to this group and glad to see you guys. I think I can't remember when, you guys would know better, but I remember being, I think in maybe January or February at a DMBA meeting, and Dr. Gaines was the speaker. I can't remember the timing of that, but I wanted to say maybe it was January last year, but I found out on Thursday when I was speaking to the San Antonio MBA that Dr. Gaines retired. So I was sad to hear that, because I always looked forward to his economic forecasts. And like I said, it's rare when you get a economist that has a few jokes and isn't as dry. So I hear that he's maybe going to consult for the Texas Real Estate Center, so perhaps he'll still make the circuit. But I'll do my best to fill in some of the stats that Dr. Gaines typically gives us. Anyway, so while I've got you, a lot of you guys are on the board, so you're familiar with this. But for those of you that are not, wanted to alert you to some things coming up. The next big, number one, we've now completed the 100% virtual calendar. So secondary last year was our last in-person event, and having just done secondary on a virtual basis, we've now kind of created the whole loop around the track, if you will, virtually. But I do have some good news, is that there's an end in sight to that. But next up is Advocacy Day. It's really week after next, and it will be virtual, which is a little disappointing, but I also think it may work out in our favor. Maybe we'll get more participation. It'll be easier to get some appointments scheduled, because you're not trying to cram them into like a 4 or 5 hour window. And so that will look like on the Tuesday, the 22nd. We'll have an orientation. John Fleming will review the bills for us, and then Evan Smith from the Texas Tribune will give us his view of the Capitol and the inside look there. And for those of you that haven't seen Evan, he's really one of my favorite speakers when it comes to Austin politics. And there's been a lot of interesting stuff going on in Austin in the last 12 to 18 months. So that's worth the price of admission, and admission is really only $50. So hope you guys will come out and join us. It'd be great to have 100 people and meetings to talk about what's important for us in Austin. Second big news here is that come hell or high water, we are having our 105th convention in person in Fort Worth. Now, we did move it back. You can see here on the screen. We pushed it back to late August. We were originally scheduled for May 3rd at the Omni in Fort Worth, and thought that with some of the company travel restrictions and things like that we're still sort of experiencing, that may be a little dicey. And so rather than try to have a hybrid convention, or maybe have a convention with less than optimal attendance, we elected to push back. And there's nothing more enjoyable than Fort Worth in late August. I trust me. But we are going to have it, and if we have 200 people, great. If we have 500-600, great. And we do think that may bode well for our success. I think by late August, we'll be closer to herd immunity, and I think people will be itching to get out and get rid of these virtual meetings that we've all been doing for the last year. So it'll be a great time at the Omni in Fort Worth, a great town, one of my favorites, and hopefully you guys will come out and join us. So clearly everybody from Dallas, it's just a quick drive. So hopefully looking to have a great convention, and looks like we may be the first major industry convention or event to come out of the gates. So looking forward to that. Also wanted to alert you guys to the Leadership Institute. I think we've got some graduates on the call here. We did our first one in 19, and last year, like everything, we pushed back the Leadership Institute just because a lot of the value of that is the in-person networking and going to UT Dallas and doing the 2 days there. So we're looking for our second class to kick off in 21, and I think at this point it'll kick off closer to the convention date there in late summer, and then wind its way through the various events. But it's a great program. It's kind of similar to the MBA's Future Leaders program, but it's our version of that with a Texas spin, and it's got less travel, it's easier to travel, and it's a little more affordable. So if you've got people in your company or you yourself want to join, I highly encourage you to do that, and reach out to some of the 23 or 24 people that went through last year and did it. So moving on, this is Dallas, and I think some of you guys are probably familiar with the ticket. And Craig Miller, as I thought about what to talk about, I thought about Craig Miller, who's on the Musers. He does his top 5, bottom 5 lists all the time, and his are, the one that sticks out in my mind is the top 5, bottom 5 tools in your toolbox. But mine is, top 5, bottom 5 things in our current Texas mortgage industry, which, could be, is the glass half full or glass half empty, or, what keeps me up at night anyway. So I'm going to rattle through what I think are, 5 things to be a little bit concerned about, and then some things that I think are encouraging. Before I do that, though, I did, going back to the Advocacy Day, just some updates on that from Austin. John just sent an update here this morning for you guys that are on the TMBA list. But the overall tone is that the deep freeze and COVID are monopolizing most discussions in Austin, which isn't a bad thing for us. If we could just be left alone in any legislative session, I think we consider that a victory. But John does report that things stemming from the ERCOT disaster and then the still lingering pandemic stuff are the 2 primary headline issues in Austin. There are a couple of issues. One is restoring there's a couple of bills to restore appraisal rules back to where they were prior to November, when Attorney General Paxton issued an opinion basically stating that everybody has to do a full appraisal, even when federal law and state permits lenders to use a cheaper valuation process. And banks a lot of times will use valuations when loans are less than $400,000 to do a less expensive, less exhaustive appraisal. And the Attorney General opinion issued in November kind of put that on its ear. So there's 2 bills, the Senate and a House companion, that have been filed to restore us back to where we were, which is a good thing for consumers because it's a cheaper, more effective, and faster way to get appraisals done. And for you, those out there, I know Mark's on the origination side, appraisal lag and getting appraisals done these days is a challenge. So anything we can do to make it faster, easier would be good. So we'll be supporting that from a TMBA perspective. It also called to question the use of desktop appraisals and hybrid appraisals that became kind of a tool used in the pandemic when we were looking for social distancing and didn't want appraisers going into houses, et cetera. So it clarifies that. So that's really, up until today, the biggest thing that we think is to support. John just sent out an email about 20 minutes ago that Representative Eddie Lucio has filed a bill on PACE legislation, which is for it's under the guise of energy improvements and sustainable energy and water conservation, et cetera. But the problem with these bills always is that they like to give a super priority lien on a PACE loan. And so that's obviously problematic for us in the mortgage business to have somebody come in after the fact and issue a loan that has a super priming interest. So according to John, this will be at the top of our legislative stop agenda. So but that's the kind of stuff that John will sort of educate us on the 22nd. And then those are the kind of things that we'll talk about as we go and do our visits virtually in Austin. Quick PAC update. Last year was one of the best years we've ever had, especially given that we didn't have any big home equity type legislation trying to get passed. Mark Raskin, I guess, it always will have the banner for PAC dollars raised, because in Mark's presidency is when we got the latest home equity rules changed in Austin. So we had a giant year there. But last year, a fantastic year. We raised 121,000, and the only caveat there, or the only sort of negative I see in that, is that we had 267 individuals contribute to the PAC last year. So in an industry that employs tens of thousands in our state, to only have 267 of us support the PAC, I think leaves some headroom to improve on that. Even if we raised less but had 500 contributors, I would consider that a victory. So I do think that we'll be looking to see if we can't up those numbers. And for those of you that know Aaron D is taking over the PAC this year. So I suggest you make your PAC donations now, or you'll be hearing from Aaron D, because I know she'll do a fantastic job for us. All right, so moving back to my top 5, bottom 5. I'll go through the bottom 5 first, so we can close on a positive. But really, the end of forbearance is out there, and eventually it will come. You can see here. Can you guys see that, or do you have this little thing on the screen when I speak? The little ring central.
We can see it, Jim.
Do you get this little ring central thing obscure the slides, or is that just on my screen?
No, that's just on your screen, Jim. And you can move that. You can drag it around.
Okay. All right. So anyway, so this was just published by the DMBA, and this is kind of, forbearance stats. And obviously you could see, the peak, but, there's still a tremendous amount of loans in forbearance. You can see this on the portfolio and the Ginnie side. It's, 9 and 7%. It's obviously improved quite a bit on the Fannie Freddie side, but it's still a gigantic number. And, at this point, it's been pushed out. I think FHFA has now extended the forbearance moratorium to June of 21, and there's discussions about whether or not it extends, beyond that. But at some point, we're going to have to deal with it. So what does it mean for the economy and our industry? That's hard to tell. But, there's some things working here. And this is a chart of really, this is the distressed home sales. And you can see 2020, a low going back to really 2004. And you can see the peak that we went through in the post-financial crisis there, and then kind of trending down. But I do anticipate the shape of this curve repeating itself, is because, I don't want to call it pin-up demand, but there's obviously a pin-up amount of, distressed properties that are going to have to come to market now. You might argue that that'd be a good thing as we get to some of my later slides, as we talk about the inventory issues. But there's a quote out there which I thought was good. This was in Barron's. It said that, there's this morphine drip into the body economic that is so powerful that you have no idea what the underlying condition of the patient is. So we have no idea what the true state of the housing market is, or would be hypothetically, because we've hit with such a huge dose of morphine. And that morphine is basically forbearance and a foreclosure moratorium. So once we come out of it, it remains to be seen kind of what that looks like in terms of the economy and our industry. So, I would say that's something we're going to have to keep an eye on. Second thing I'd say that concerns me is the current state of the economy. And some people would say, what are you talking about? We're, things are on the uprise. We're getting vaccines. The economy's going to boom and all that. But I was on a presentation last week or two, and this was from a Freddie Mac economist, and talked about, while things are improving, if you ignored the pandemic and said 6.5% unemployment is our current state, that would be alarming. I mean, in any other environment, that would be, we're in a deep recession and we're in trouble. Also, as you can see here on the top chart here, the pace of job addition is slow, and you can see the big drop, and then kind of the add backs, and then we've kind of flattened, honestly. So according to Freddie Mac, they don't expect employment to be back to its pre-COVID levels until 2024. So it's not as if, by late summer, we're all back to where we were and everybody's got a job and stock market's booming and everything else. So I think that, people are leaving the labor force. The economy, in some people's estimation, has been forever changed. We've all learned to go with less travel, less occupancy in offices and things like that, and that stuff's liable to ripple through our economy. So I think it could be a concern and something we'll watch. Clearly in Texas, maybe we're insulated because I think like pre-pandemic, Texas was kind of leading all 50 states in economic activity. So hopefully that insulates us, but we'll find out soon enough. Third, the return of the Obama era CFPB. And this is, I always try to be agnostic on politics, and this is really just stating facts that there are some real concerning sort of statements out there. And I was on the IMB exec call yesterday, and Rohit Chopra is the nominee to lead the CFPB. And what I learned yesterday is he is a disciple of Elizabeth Warren and intends to basically run the CFPB like Cordray, if not even more so, in terms of focusing on enforcement as their mechanism. So he did in his and he testified before Senate Banking Committee and did pledge that the focus that he would be as director would be student loan borrowers, which is okay. That's not in our turf, but consumers trying to correct inaccurate credit reports. Obviously, I think that's in response to the pandemic and forbearance, and obviously homeowners are affected by the coronavirus pandemic, and then other sort of things that he's talked about is servicers. So I think servicers are going to be squarely in the crosshairs of the CFPB. And for those of you that work for servicers or companies that do servicing, the complexities and how many opportunities you have to make a mistake when you're dealing with consumers day in and day out. You're dealing with transfers of servicing and escrows coming in, escrows going out, and balancing, all that kind of stuff. But I think it's an area for concern and an area to kind of go back to sort of that mentality that we all had when Cordray was the director. Was enforcement is going to be their mechanism. So to a lesser extent, he talked about the QM rule, and we talked about that yesterday, and it's less clear of where they're going to fall out on that. But he said that he's looking forward to getting input. But I also heard from Kilmer yesterday that they'll get input, but that doesn't mean that they're going to basically always listen to it. So it's a concern. We'll be following it. But if I was running a company, which I am, I'm sort of thinking and putting my head back to where it was when we were thinking about CFPB mock audits and tabletop audits and being prepared for when they come calling, because it seems as if we're going back into that. Number 4 on my bottom things, the lack of housing inventory. And, this is pretty graphic. You can see here, really the probably since these statistics have been tracked, the lowest level of home inventories ever. And combine that with insatiable appetite for homes of what we're seeing and cheap money, you're seeing rapid price appreciation. But here's another look at a chart, is that this is the inventory compared to this time last year. And, lots of red and dark red. You can see here in Texas, 44% less inventory than we had. I think this is at the end of February. All of the dark red, you're seeing 50% or more less inventory than we had. And so this is an issue. I mean, we have a loan officer in Austin, and she told me a story last month of pre-qualifying a buyer, and the buyer went out and stood in line for an hour and a half in drizzle to tour a property. This was I think a $350,000 or $400,000 home in Austin. Stood in line for an hour and a half just to get into the property. And then on Monday was one of 91 contracts that came in on the house. So that's clearly not a healthy dynamic. But as I said, you go back to this low inventory, and you can still borrow at 3.25. There is still a supply-demand imbalance. Now, there is some good news. Mike Frantoni shared these yesterday, and you could see that the month supply, the dark lines, that is what I just covered on the previous charts. But the lighter colors is the months, is the existing sort of units coming online of existing or or new home inventory, and you can see that that is encouraging. It's just odd that, you know, you would have the one chart showing, you know, 6.5 million units coming on while supply going down and all that. So it's a concern, and it's a concern in Texas. And, you know, I talked about when I was sworn in, and one of my sort of concerns for the state and our industry was affordable housing. And believe me, this dynamic right here is not helping. So I think home affordability is something that we're going to have to deal with, and it's getting worse and worse, not better, despite efforts to sort of deal with that. So, and lastly, you know, this goes. I mean, the fact that here we are at DMBA, a monthly meeting, and we're on a Zoom call or a Ring Central call or whatever. I mean, this is starting to take its toll, and you know, I think we all saw this in our companies where, you know, the first 3 months we were, you know, everybody had their head down and working, and then, you know, the fact that they really couldn't go on vacation because there was nowhere to travel to, and the volume has been unrelenting, I think, has taken a personal toll. And so it's a challenge as you know, all of us to keep morale up, to keep people engaged, and keep your culture protected when, you know, you can't go out and you can't see people, and you depend on these Zoom meetings. And you know, I think we all have, you know, Zoom or team call, you know, reluctance at this point, because it seems like that's all we do all day long. So hopefully, like I said, if you want to get out, join us in Fort Worth in late August, and we'll get to see each other all again. So let's move on to the positive stuff. And this is my Dr. Gaines part of the speech where I talk about Texas immigration. I think as a mortgage banker in Texas, you have to feel bolstered by these stats on the next slides and really what's going on in our state. This is actually from the Texas Real Estate Center, and this is the total population growth estimates. And I think most of you have seen Dr. Gaines' speech, and I always said that over the last year and a half, he was giving those speeches about Dallas and Austin, Texas, San Antonio and Houston, the Texas Triangle. His growth numbers for those metropolitan areas, it was nothing short of astounding. And I always said, you know, I don't want to live in a Dallas that goes from, I don't even know what our numbers in Dallas are. Let's call DFW Metroplex, you know, 10 million. His stats are having to go into 20 million, you know, by 2030 or 2040. But on a macro, you can see here the estimated population of Texas was just a shade under 30 million. And the next 10 years growing by almost 5 million. And then by 2040, almost up to 40 million. So I'm not sure where I will put all those people. I'm not sure what house all those people, but what it means if you're in the business of providing mortgage loans to them, it bodes well, because, you know, those 40 million people need a house to live in. Most of them, at least 65%, if you look at home ownership rates. So that's encouraging. You know, you look at where it's happening, and this is where people are migrating to. This kind of, you know, proves out the Texas Triangle, with the exception of, you know, the El Paso out there in the border area, which is driven by immigration and other things out there. Obviously, the energy business. I think that those dark blue get out to Midland, Odessa area as well. But you can see Dallas, Fort Worth, Austin, San Antonio, megapolis, and then the Houston area, 100% or greater over the last 5 years. And all projections are for this to continue, if not get even more exacerbated in terms of the population growth in these things. So as I said, those people need to buy houses, and in the mortgage business, we're in the business of helping that. So that's encouraging. You can see here that, you know, last year, despite the pandemic, when we all basically were holed up on our houses, MLS home sales increased by 9.4%. And you can see the slope of this last 10 years is a positive one. And if you were to take this chart and forecast it out the next 10 years, some people think that the slope of this would be even more pronounced. And so, as I said, it's encouraging. It makes me, you know, in my mind, it gives me enough home activity maybe to get me to retirement age. So some of you younger ones may have to worry about 15 years from now, but I think there's no reason to think that the industry for us is going to slow down anytime soon. Here's another look at something encouraging, is that, you know, at least housing permits have gone up dramatically. You can see Texas is the red line. You can see the slope in 2020 of our permits going up dramatically. Whether or not that is enough to meet demand remains to be seen. I had a question the other day from on the San Antonio call about, too many permits, and are we going to have a glut of housing and apartment units available? And I don't think that's the case because of the supply demand imbalance. But if mortgage rates and lending rates were to go up precipitously, perhaps. But as I'll get into in a few slides, I don't think anytime in the next few years lending rates are going to be prohibitively expensive. Speaking of rates, they're still historically low. I was on my way in talking. This chart's a little bit dated because this was really early February when this slide was out, when we were around 273. But talking to a loan officer this morning, and you guys know as well as I do that today your 30-year rates are probably on a conventional loan, around the 3.25% rate, something like that, which you can see is still. If you look across this chart going back 10 years, 3.25% would really be the trough or below anything that you've had over the previous 10 years. So despite the little run up in the 10-year to 150, 160, the fact that you can still borrow at 3.25 or better is extremely positive for us. Here's another look at that in terms of the 30-year fixed rate going back, over the last 2 years from 4.5 down to where we are today. This one was right at 3, but still extremely, extremely attractive rates. And then here's MBA's forecast of really out to the next 2 years. And you can see their red chart line there staying really just under 4%. So, this one goes back to really 1998. And, this is a little bit of the old man syndrome, but, I bought my first house and remember I had a 5-year ARM at 8.25 and thought that I'd really outfoxed the market with my very below market interest rate. So, rates between 3 and 4%, extremely conducive to the housing, the mortgage business. So that's attractive. The other good news here is that, by some estimates, 40 to 45% of the existing outstanding mortgage debt is still in the money to refinance. The question is why those people haven't refinanced to this point. But if you look at the numbers of between the 3.5 and to the right, there's still somewhere between 1.2 to $2 trillion of mortgage debt that's on the books at 375 to greater. So while the refinance market is anticipated to come down off of the all-time historic highs that we experienced last year, by no means is the refi market dead. So you couple that with the purchase market, and I think that the MBA yesterday is projecting $2.9 to $3 trillion market this year, which again would put it as one of the top 3 or 4 all-time markets we've ever had. So despite our little run up, I think we can all take solace that it's going to be great for the time being. Further, this is the millennials, and this is an interesting chart. And looking at the generations, and you can see the oldest millennials are now about to turn 40. And I read an article recently about, if you went back 7 or 10 years, they said, oh, the millennials, they may not want to buy houses, they may want to live in the city urban core and be renters and things like that. And this article said, you know what? Just like every generation before them, these millennials that are turning 40 now want to have houses because they have kids and they want a yard and they want space for all the accoutrements that come with kids and things like that. And so you're starting to see the leading edge of millennials really get into the serious home buying. And then behind that, this peak in this chart is the peak of the millennial generation. They're just now turning 29 and 30 years old. So it's a tremendous sort of demographic push into the home buying sort of sweet spot. Then you look behind the millennials, Gen Z at this point is bigger than the millennial cohort. So these are people born from 1999 to 2020. So really, this is a chart. It's been one of my favorite charts for a decade now, and it goes back to I think Doug Duncan at the time was MBA economist and is now Fannie Mae. But talking about the ups and downs of interest rates and all that, you only really need to look at this chart to know that you should be bullish on mortgage and real estate lending because, everybody needs a place to live. And, historically that means 65% of these gigantic generations will be home buyers. So, whenever I feel like, things are slowing down, I always kind of refer back to this chart. The digital revolution jumpstart, I would say this was a positive, and this is something that if you think about the pandemic and what we went through last year, and then think about what would have happened to our industry if this had happened 20 years ago. I mean, you think about the ability to work remotely because we have high-speed internet, and basically almost every employee we had high-speed internet, video technology, scanning ability, all that kind of stuff basically kind of enabled us to have, the greatest all-time origination market in our mortgage industry's history. But it had also kind of pushed the industry into adopting technologies, which I think are great for the industry. They're great for the consumer. And I think there's nothing like a good old-fashioned crisis to jumpstart any activity. I mean, you think about the pandemic and what happened with the vaccines. It was the fastest, vaccine ever in the history of mankind, and most people thought would never be able to be achieved. Same thing happened with digital technology and video technology and e-closings and hybrid e-closings and all that. So I think the good news is that out of necessity, we were forced to jump in the pool. And I think it's been good for us, and it'll be good for our industry moving forward. Housing stimulus, I think this is something that is going to be good. Counterbalancing my comments earlier of the CFPB and the return of that is that I think that the current administration recognizes housing is going to be a driver of the economy. And if they really want to get the economy back to where it was and chugging along, they're going to have to pay attention to housing. Now, in the $1.9 trillion bill that was just passed, there is quite a bit of housing provisions. I'd say, looking at it, more of it's focused on rental assistance and people like that. And to be honest, I think the rental population is more impacted by the pandemic and the loss of jobs and income. But there's $10 billion allocated for homeowner assistance funds. There's $25 billion in the plan for renters, another $20 billion for emergency rental assistance to cover rent and utilities, et cetera, and then $100 million for housing counseling. What wasn't in there is something that was talked about in the early days of the post-election inauguration was a first-time homebuyer credit, and I think MBA and most people think that's still in the wings. So a $15,000 first-time homebuyer credit would be an amazing stimulus, and perhaps go to addressing some of that affordable housing sort of issue that we're having. But at this point, I think they're going to digest this one and then get around to that. But there's no doubt that they view housing as something that they're going to have to pay attention to and support. So at least in the near term, we've got that going for us. So in closing, I put this in there just because whenever asked to do these kind of presentations, I'm always worried about, well, gosh, how in the world would I fill up, 30 minutes, much less 10 minutes. I have this, and I think most of us have this speaker's fear of, okay, I'll speak for 5 minutes and then I don't know what to do. But anyway, so I won't go too in depth on this. This is just kind of my endorsement of a TED Talk for me that I go back to repeatedly, and it's about grateful living. And it was by a monk, and his name is David Stendal Rast. And he talks about really the key to happipiness, and talks about really, as humans, our nature is to want to be happy. And so, how do you do that? How do you become happy? And, take your self-help books and things like that. But really his premise of this TED Talk is that basically grateful living is how you basically connect your life to happiness. And it's most people think, oh well, happy people are grateful, but he kind of goes to say, look, it's the opposite way. Grateful people are happy, and you think about well, gosh, what does it take to be grateful? Do you have blessings and, hashtag blessed and all that kind of stuff? But it's no, I mean, there are people out there, Mother Teresa and, people like that lived on a pauper's salary and people that had extreme misfortune in their lives and all that, but they were deeply happy. And that's because, gratefulness is what makes you happy. And I think I think recently we can all relate to this because, in this TED Talk, he talks about going on a mission to Africa and going without water and electricity during the mission work made him appreciate or be grateful for the little things in life that you always take for granted. And I think for us, obviously all in Texas, all of us can probably weigh in on this. It's like, gosh, we took running water and, functioning pipes and electricity for granted. And once we all go without for a little bit of time, it's amazing how grateful you are to have that. He even talks about, putting lights on his light switches around his house, little stars to remind him every time he turns on the light to be grateful for that. And so, like I said, I won't go too deeply, except that he just goes on to talk about, if the whole society could be grateful, and recognize the opportunity, which is to be grateful for something that's given to you and it has value. And to draw a parallel to our business, I mean, I think there's no doubt we should all be grateful for this great business that we get to work in, the great business that ultimately is putting people in homes or saving people money by refinancing their loans. And that's something that I think we all, when we have heads down and we're dealing with, underwriting queues that are stretched out to untenable levels and people, angry about, things, ultimately is looking down and saying, like, I'm grateful to get to do this. I'm grateful to work our way through this and have the opportunity to do it. And I'm, grateful to have a state like I've talked about that has such great underpinnings for success that we all forget that. So, the monk in this TED Talk, obviously he's talking about world peace and a grateful society. I'm just trying to get across to you guys on this call that we could all be grateful to everything about the Texas mortgage industry and each other and the chance to sit, get together and talk about issues like this. And so my last slide is, this was literally pulling into the parking garage on Tuesday. I came across this and I had to stop and back up and take a picture of this because, as I said, whenever I get sort of discouraged and all that, I kind of go back and watch this TED Talk and try to recenter myself to be grateful and not complain about, my gosh, what I have to do today or things like that. But, this is a great license plate and, it probably lends itself to lots of jokes. This guy is driving a Tesla and the Oklahoma license plate and grateful, but I'll leave those aside and just say that, I'm just jealous that he got this license plate or whatever, because to me, this is what it's about. So that's all I had. That's my state of the state. I feel like, if I was standing up in front of Congress, the state of our union is strong or whatever. And hopefully you guys got a feel for that. And we'd love to have you guys that are not, in TMBA committees or on our board, come join us. There's endless opportunities to serve the TMBA. And like I said, if nothing else, please come out and join us virtually at Advocacy Day and or the convention in August. Promises to be a coming out party for the industry, and I think one I think we're all looking forward to seeing each other in person. So Hannah, happy to take questions or we can sign off, but I appreciate you guys having me today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jim, so much for being here. That was such great information. While we're here, does anybody have a question? I think everybody's muted, but feel free to unmute yourself or type in the chat.
Raskin,
I just want to make a comment, not a question. Jim, you became president in completely uncharted territory of trying to figure out how we're going to operate our companies, our teams, our production, and the largest state-run mortgage association in the country, obviously probably world then for that matter. And for you to keep everybody going forward from TMBA's perspective, your own company, et cetera, I just wanted to applaud you and thank you. And it's little things like you probably haven't seen all the group chats going on right now. Everybody needed I don't want to call it pep talk, but the positive outlook that you ended your spiel with, and that's why we are very grateful that you have been leading the charge for us over the past year, because otherwise I could see with an average leader in that role, this association be dwindling down to nothing. So thank you very much for everything you've done and continue to do.
Appreciate that, Mark. And not to name another state, but TMBA, I mean, we literally financially kind of sailed through this and did well. And that's a testament to everybody that came before me that set the TMBA up for success. But there were other state associations that literally had to go out and request sort of, people to donate because they were suffering tremendously. So as you said, the TMBA is really the largest state mortgage association in the world. And it's, it goes without saying, I'm grateful to have gotten to do that. And, I'm sad Trey's not here because I always like to get my digs in, but the one drawback, or it depends on your point of view, is that by pushing the convention to late August, that means I will now be the longest serving president because we will not swear in our new until late August, which means I'll have a 16 or 17 month run as president. So, but that's okay.
Well, I'll make sure we double your pay for the extra work.
Yeah, at least double the amount of hospitality in my suite that night.
Hannah?
Yes, Amy.
This is Amy Koch, and I just want to, before everybody gets off of here, give kind of a shameless plug for the Advocacy Day, the events, to let you know that we worked really hard. We've got a great schedule put together. The meetings are falling into place, the virtual meetings. We have over 60 people registered already. But this is a great opportunity this year, with it being virtual, for everybody people who have never attended before, to attend and kind of get a taste for what it's like. They don't have to speak, but they can attend the meetings with the legislators and see how things come about. They'll be teamed up with people who are knowledgeable and experienced and aren't afraid to speak up. So everything will be prearranged. The price point is really, really good. We've got discounts for companies sending more than 5 people. Essentially, you send 5, the next 5 are free, and it's only $49 a person anyway. So I just want to encourage everybody to sign up as many people from their companies as possible. You'll get assigned to a team that represents your district, so that you meet with the right legislators whenever possible. And there's power in numbers, so we're counting on having a lot of faces show up on these Zoom meetings. And you don't have to travel or leave your office or miss meetings. So this is a great time to do it. Just want to encourage everybody to join in. Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. And that is March 22nd and 23rd, everyone. So, and thanks for bringing that up, Jim, as well, when you first started the meeting.
Yep.
So that's pretty much it. I do want to let everybody know that we have our golf tournament coming up. So Mark Raskin, good job on practicing the other day. It's going to be May 17th. And we're going to have all of that information out on the website and available for people to register very soon. So be on the lookout for that.
Awesome.
And with that, unless somebody has anything else, we'll wrap it up. Thanks, everybody, for your time.
Thanks, Hannah.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you. All right.
Bye.